Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are covering what may be the most consequential escalation in the Middle East since the invasion of Iraq in 2003. The United States and Israel have launched a full-scale war on Iran, and if you're feeling a sickening sense of deja vu right now, you are not alone. We have 5 stories tonight that paint a picture the mainstream press is desperately trying to avoid showing you in full.
I'm Maya Clarity, and Alex, let's start exactly there, with that deja vu. Middle East Eye is running a piece right now with the headline Echoes of Iraq, mainstream media deja vu over framing of the war on Iran. We are watching, in real time, the same playbook that sold the American public on the Iraq war being dusted off and redeployed. The same newspapers, the same cable networks, the same unnamed intelligence sources making the case for why this war is necessary, justified, and inevitable.
And let's be specific about what that playbook looks like, because people need to understand this is not a coincidence, it is a formula. Step 1, you dehumanize the target nation's leadership. Step 2, you inflate the threat with vague references to weapons programs and regional destabilization. Step 3, you marginalize every dissenting voice as naive, unpatriotic, or sympathetic to the enemy. We saw it with Saddam Hussein's so-called weapons of mass destruction. Now we're seeing it with Iran.
The media learned absolutely nothing from Iraq. Or rather, let me correct myself, they learned everything from Iraq. They learned that selling a war generates enormous ratings, that embedding with the military produces dramatic content, and that by the time the public realizes they were lied to, the news cycle has moved on and no one is held accountable. The editors who ran those pro-war headlines in 2003 faced no consequences. Many of them are still in senior positions today.
And here's what Middle East Eye is pointing out that American outlets won't touch: the framing itself is the weapon. When you read "Why We Should Go to War" as a headline, that is not journalism. That is advocacy. That is a publication using its editorial authority to manufacture consent for military action that will kill thousands of people. Walter Lippmann wrote about this a century ago. Noam Chomsky updated it. And here we are, watching it happen again in high definition.
Let's connect this to the hard numbers, Alex, because story 3 is staggering. The Pentagon, not an outside critic, the Pentagon itself, has confirmed that the US and Israel have struck more than 15,000 targets in the Iran war. 15,000. Let that number sit with you. Each one of those targets is a location where explosives were dropped. Each one represents potential civilian infrastructure, homes, hospitals, power grids, water treatment facilities. And the Pentagon announces this like it's a scoreboard.
15,000 targets, and how many of those were legitimate military installations? The Pentagon doesn't break that down for you, and the press doesn't press them on it. We learned from Iraq, from Afghanistan, from Libya, from Yemen, that the definition of target is elastic enough to include wedding parties, pharmaceutical factories, and apartment buildings. When you're dropping ordnance at that scale and that pace, precision is a marketing term, not a military reality.
And who authorized this? That brings us to story 4, and this one comes from the South China Morning Post, offering a perspective you will almost never hear in Western media. The headline reads, US-Israeli war on Iran makes a mockery of global governance rules. The article lays it out plainly: the United States launched this war without congressional approval and without United Nations authorization. The constitutional requirement for Congress to declare war has been treated as a suggestion for decades, but this is a new low.
Let's be absolutely clear about what this means for the so-called rules-based international order that Washington constantly invokes. The United States tells other nations they must follow international law. It lectures China about the South China Sea. It sanctions Russia for violating Ukrainian sovereignty. And then it launches a massive military campaign against a sovereign nation without even going through the motions of legal authorization. The hypocrisy is not subtle, it is structural.
The South China Morning Post piece makes a critical point about governance being rooted in checks and balances, self-restraint, and an understanding that forever wars lead to self-destruction. This is not an anti-American argument, this is a governance argument. When the most powerful nation on earth decides it can wage war whenever it wants, against whoever it wants, without legal constraints, then the entire framework of international law becomes decorative. It exists on paper but nowhere else.
And Maya, who benefits from the destruction of that framework? Because it's not the American public. It's not the Iranian people. It's not the citizens of any country in the region. The beneficiaries are the defense contractors who see their stock prices climb with every missile launched. The beneficiaries are the politicians who use wartime rallies to silence domestic criticism. The beneficiaries are the authoritarian leaders worldwide who now have a permanent precedent for acting unilaterally.
Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, look at their quarterly earnings and you'll understand the economics of 15,000 strikes. Every Tomahawk cruise missile costs roughly $1.8 million. Every JDAM kit, every bunker buster, every drone sortie, these are line items on a balance sheet, and business has never been better. The military-industrial complex that Eisenhower warned about isn't lurking in the shadows. It's trading on the New York Stock Exchange in broad daylight.
Now let's turn to what's happening simultaneously in Lebanon, because these stories are not separate, they are chapters in the same book. Story 2, Israeli jets have dropped anti-Hezbollah leaflets over Beirut, the capital of a sovereign nation, threatening Lebanon with the same fate as Gaza. I want everyone to hear that clearly. Israel is flying military aircraft over another country's capital city and explicitly threatening to do to Lebanon what it has done to Gaza.
And we all know what Israel has done to Gaza. Tens of thousands killed, the vast majority civilians. An infrastructure reduced to rubble. Hospitals destroyed. Universities leveled. Entire family lines erased from the civil registry. And now Israel is dropping leaflets on Beirut saying, essentially, you're next. This is not a military operation, this is psychological warfare against an entire civilian population. The leaflets are designed to terrorize ordinary Lebanese people into turning against Hezbollah, using the threat of annihilation as leverage.
Think about what it means when a military drops leaflets over a capital city. It means they have complete air superiority over that nation's airspace. It means Lebanon's sovereignty exists only at Israel's discretion. And the message isn't subtle, it's a direct threat modeled on what has already been carried out in Gaza. This is collective punishment doctrine, where an entire population is held responsible for the actions of an armed group, in direct violation of the Geneva Conventions.
And this connects directly to Story 5, Alex. Israeli evacuation orders now affect 14% of Lebanon's entire territory. An NGO has documented this. 14% of a sovereign nation is under forced evacuation orders issued by a foreign military. Imagine if any other country on earth did this. Imagine if Russia issued evacuation orders over 14% of a neighboring country's territory. The Western response would be immediate, unified, and severe.
But because it's Israel, the response from Washington is muted at best and actively supportive at worst. 14% of Lebanon. That's not a targeted counterterrorism operation, that is a territorial campaign. You don't issue evacuation orders over that much land unless you intend to operate militarily across that entire area. The people being displaced are farmers, shopkeepers, teachers, families. They are being driven from their homes by a foreign power with no timeline for return.
Let's talk about what displacement means in practice, because the term evacuation order sanitizes what is actually happening. When Israel issues an evacuation order, it means, leave your home immediately or we will bomb it. People flee with whatever they can carry. They crowd into schools, into relatives' apartments, into open fields. They lose access to their livelihoods, their medical care, their children's education. And there is no guarantee whatsoever, that they will ever be allowed to return.
We've seen this model before. In 1948, in 1967, and continuously in the occupied Palestinian territories. Displacement presented as a temporary security measure becomes permanent demographic engineering. The people of southern Lebanon know this history. They lived through the Israeli occupation from 1982 to 2000. And now they're watching the same pattern unfold again, backed by the same American weapons, funded by the same American tax dollars.
Let's pull back and look at the full picture, because when you lay these 5 stories side by side, a coherent strategy emerges. The war on Iran provides the strategic cover. The assault on Lebanon neutralizes a potential front of resistance. The media framing ensures domestic populations in the US and Israel remain passive or supportive. The circumvention of international law removes any institutional check. And the sheer scale, 15,000 targets, creates facts on the ground that no peace process can reverse.
This is not 5 separate stories. This is one story with 5 dimensions. And the dimension that should concern every person watching this broadcast is the media dimension, because that is the mechanism by which your consent is being manufactured. When the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN frames this war as a response to Iranian aggression, they are making an editorial choice to adopt the Pentagon's narrative. They are not reporting, they are participating.
And the voices being excluded from that coverage are telling. Where are the Iranian civilians describing what 15,000 strikes feel like? Where are the Lebanese families packing their belongings under threat of bombardment? Where are the international law scholars explaining that this war is illegal under both domestic and international law? Those voices exist. Those experts are available. The decision to exclude them is a choice, and it is a choice that serves power.
Let's talk about what the mainstream media is specifically not telling you about Iran. Iran is a country of 88 million people. It has one of the oldest continuous civilizations in human history. It has universities, hospitals, a film industry, a literary tradition that spans millennia. When we reduce Iran to its government, to its nuclear program, to its proxies, we are doing exactly what was done to Iraq, stripping an entire nation of its humanity to make it easier to bomb.
And the geopolitical consequences extend far beyond the Middle East. The South China Morning Post piece touches on this. When America wages war without authorization, it sends a message to every rising power that the rules don't apply to the strong. China is watching. India is watching. Brazil, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, every nation with regional ambitions is watching Washington demonstrate that international law is a tool of convenience, applied selectively to constrain rivals and ignored when it constrains you.
We're witnessing the collapse of the post-World War II order in real time, and it's not being destroyed by some external enemy. It's being dismantled by its architect. The United Nations, the International Court of Justice, the Geneva Conventions, these institutions were built primarily by American leadership. And now American leadership is rendering them irrelevant through its own actions. You cannot bomb 15,000 targets without authorization and then lecture other nations about a rules-based order with a straight face.
And domestically, Alex, where is Congress? Where are the elected representatives who are constitutionally required to authorize the use of military force? They are fundraising. They are posting on social media. They are giving speeches about other issues. The abdication of congressional war powers didn't start with Iran, it's been happening since the War Powers Act was passed in 1973 and then systematically ignored by every administration since. But each new war normalizes the next one.
The economic cost is another dimension the press buries. We just saw estimates suggesting the Iraq War cost the United States over $3 trillion when you factor in long-term veteran care and interest on borrowed money. The war on Iran will dwarf that. And every dollar spent on cruise missiles is a dollar not spent on healthcare, on education, on infrastructure, on addressing the climate crisis. The American people are financing their own decline, and they're not even being asked permission.
Let me bring it back to Lebanon for a moment, because the 14% figure deserves more attention. Lebanon is already in the grip of one of the worst economic crises in modern history. The currency has lost over 90% of its value. The banking system has collapsed. And now 14% of the country is under evacuation orders. You are displacing hundreds of thousands of people in a nation that has no capacity to absorb them. This is not collateral damage, this is a humanitarian catastrophe layered on top of an existing humanitarian catastrophe.
And the leaflets dropped over Beirut are a form of psychological operation that violates the dignity of an entire nation. When you fly military jets over a capital city and drop paper threatening destruction, you are telling every person in that city that their life is conditional on the political choices of others, conditional on the military calculations of a foreign power. That is the definition of terrorism, using the threat of violence against civilians to achieve political objectives.
The pattern we're identifying tonight is not new, but its scale is unprecedented. Simultaneous military operations across multiple countries, the wholesale abandonment of legal frameworks, media complicity in manufacturing consent, and the displacement of civilian populations, all happening at once, all reinforcing each other, all serving the same strategic interests. And the people paying the price are the ones who had no say in any of it.
So let's name those interests directly, because Truth Report doesn't do euphemisms. This war serves the Israeli government's goal of regional dominance by eliminating Iran as a strategic counterweight. It serves the American defense industry's need for perpetual conflict to justify perpetual spending. It serves political leaders in both countries who use wartime dynamics to consolidate domestic power. And it serves the fossil fuel interests that benefit from instability in the world's most energy-rich region.
And who loses? Iranian civilians who are dying under 15,000 strikes. Lebanese families driven from 14% of their country. American taxpayers funding a war they didn't authorize. The Global South watching international law dissolve. Future generations who will inherit the debt, the instability, and the blowback. Every lesson of the last 20 years of failed wars in the Middle East is being ignored, not because those lessons are unknown, but because the people making these decisions benefit from ignoring them.
I want to return to the media framing one final time, because this is where each of you watching has agency. When you see a headline that says, "Strikes on Iran," without mentioning civilian casualties, that is a framing choice. When you see the word "targets" without any interrogation of what those targets actually are, that is a framing choice. When Lebanon's displacement is buried on page 12 while weapons technology gets front-page treatment, that is a framing choice. Every one of those choices serves someone, and it is not serving you.
The echoes of Iraq are deafening for anyone willing to listen. The same anonymous intelligence sources. The same editorial boards beating war drums. The same marginalization of dissent. And the same predictable trajectory: initial military success declared, mission accomplished banners unfurled, followed by years of occupation, insurgency, regional destabilization, and ultimately a quiet admission that the whole thing was a catastrophic mistake. Except the dead don't come back when you admit the mistake.
So here is our call to action, and we don't say this lightly. First, diversify your news sources immediately. Read Middle East Eye, read Al Jazeera, read the South China Morning Post, read journalists reporting from the ground in the region. The information exists, it's just not being centered in Western mainstream coverage. You have to actively seek perspectives that challenge the dominant narrative, because that narrative is being constructed to keep you passive.
Second, contact your congressional representatives and demand they invoke the War Powers Act. This war was launched without congressional authorization, which means your representatives have a legal obligation to act. Call their offices. Show up at town halls. Make it clear that you do not consent to a war waged in your name, with your money, without your permission. Democracy is not a spectator sport, and right now the spectators are financing a war they never voted for.
Third, support independent journalism financially. The reason outlets like Middle East Eye can report what the New York Times won't is that they operate outside the corporate media ecosystem. Subscribe to independent outlets. Donate to press freedom organizations. Share investigative reporting on your platforms. The media landscape that enabled the Iraq War hasn't reformed itself, it has to be replaced by something better, and that only happens with your support.
And finally, resist the dehumanization. When you hear Iran reduced to a regime, remember 88 million human beings. When you hear Lebanon described as a Hezbollah stronghold, remember a nation of artists, writers, and families. When you see the number 15,000 and your mind goes numb, force yourself to think about one target, one building, one family. The scale is designed to overwhelm your capacity for empathy. Do not let it.
This is Truth Report. The stories we covered tonight, the media's Iraq-style war framing, the leaflets dropped over Beirut, 15,000 targets struck, the mockery of international law, 14% of Lebanon under evacuation, these are not separate crises. They are one crisis, and it is a crisis of accountability. No one authorized this. No one is checking it. And no one will stop it unless ordinary people demand that it stops.
I'm Maya Clarity. Remember, the truth doesn't report itself. We'll see you next time.